Welcome back to the channel. This will be my team selection for Fantasy Premier League as we approach the Game Week 4 deadline. I'll be going live on Saturday, so stay tuned for that, of course. And over the weekend, the plan is to do a reaction stream, but Use Your Fantasy will return next Tuesday. And in preparation for that, I'll be making even more videos like a Use Your Fantasy chip strategy guide. The same goes for my team selection. And of course, I'll be going live around 2 hours before the first kickoff of the Champions League. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content for both fantasy formats throughout the entire season. And for FPL Challenge, I also cover this as well in my team selection podcast and also the deadline stream. So I haven't made any changes since my transfer plans podcast last week, but this will be finalized in time for that Saturday deadline. And ultimately with this, you can change these players just before their game kicks off. So if someone is benched or something like that, you can replace them in due course. But I've currently got Alisson Becker as my goalkeeper facing Burnley away. I've also got Munoz and Mateta facing Sunderland at home. Mohamed Salah with a poor record against Burnley, he still makes it into this team. But this week, the challenge is called Classic Rivalry. So any players from Manchester United and Manchester City will score double the number of points. And that's why I've got Bruno Fernandes and Erling Haaland as my captain. And to be honest, I think he could be the best captain overall this week, which I've discussed in my recent podcasts. Check all the links in the description below for my Patreon and the Championships, fair likes to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. But without further ado, let's jump straight into it. On Saturday, I provided a review of Game Week 3 in my Transfer Plans podcast, and it's safe to say it was my worst week by some distance, and I hope I don't replicate that anytime soon. But Robert Sanchez was in goal, and he kept a clean sheet in that 2-0 win against Fulham, and Chelsea are certainly much better defensively this season, and they have matured in the last couple of months, but there are still some deficiencies at the back, and I think their choice of goalkeeper, of course, could hold them back in terms of challenging for the league title. But at 5 million, you find great value in Robert Sanchez, and I think Chelsea will be one of the favourites to finish in the top 4, and their short-term fixtures remain decent, although the clean sheet potential might dip, even in fixtures like Brentford away coming up next. Then it's Man United, who, for all their problems, are still going to be very challenging to the top teams in the country, and Chelsea are certainly one of them this season. As for my defensive line, it was extremely underwhelming. Pedro Porro retrospectively got DEFCON points, and I talked about the kind of problems with that system and the bonus points, and how FPL have done things based on teams and players who feature in the last game of a given match day, and then players like Pedro Porro, who on the Saturday have the benefit of the doubt, and they can have the Opta stats kind of rectified, so they can score DEFCON points retrospectively, as we saw in the case of Pedro Porro. Murillo and Konsa both blanked and delivered 1-pointers, but the big news over the last couple of days was the sacking of Nuno Espirito Santo, and he has been replaced by Ange Postecoglou at the helm for Nottingham Forest, so I think that could cause some problems in their defensive line. And despite having some promising fixtures after Arsenal next week, facing Burnley and Sunderland, I'd be less keen on the likes of Murillo, and he could be first on the chopping block for me going into Game Week 4. But as for Konsa, and the same goes for any Aston Villa asset really, they have been a massive letdown so far this season, and I don't think they're necessarily a priority sell and you have to get rid of them ASAP. But I think if you're in a position of strength, you can optimise your squad with a few changes, and Ollie Watkins remains my favourite Aston Villa asset. I know he's very expensive at 8.9 million, but with the likes of Konsa, you've got other options at 4.5 million who look very appealing. Mark Gay could be one of them. The same goes for Chris Richards from Crystal Palace. But in my midfield, it was still quite mixed bag. Both Salah and Gakpo blanked against Arsenal, but they still got the job done in that really important title decider almost. Ismaila Sarr scored towards the very end of that game against Aston Villa, but picked up an injury in the process, and he's now set to miss an entire month. He is still yellow flagged in FPL at the time of this recording, but I would expect him to be red flagged very soon. And Reinders blanked as well, and the biggest disappointment here is that in the deadline stream, I had Indai in my starting 11, but I went for Reinders in the last minute or so, and it resulted in a deficit of 5 points. As for my forward line, it was slightly better, but really just because of Joao Pedro getting 9 points. He has such a template option, so you're not going to get too many rank rises from having Joao Pedro, but those that captain him, it will be a different story. I went for Chris Wood instead with the armband, and just like Ollie Watkins in Game Week 2, both of them have been disappointing. Now, the reason why I'm quite bullish on Ollie Watkins still is because Aston Villa are still quite highly ranked in the fixture difficulty rating for the next couple of game weeks, and he still has some decent underlying numbers as opposed to Morgan Rogers, who doesn't look like scoring on the eye test, but also with the stats like the XG and expected assists. But Ollie Watkins is still producing decent, sustainable figures that could lead into returns very soon. And he has a great record against Everton, even away from home. But it will be a new stadium, of course, as they face each other at the Hill Dickinson Stadium and not Goodison Park, as we saw over the last couple of years. But when it comes to the captaincy, I might need to stick with the likes of Salah and more reliable options. But it's also worth going for it. And I think having a little bit of a differential captain, it just hasn't worked in my favour in the last 2 weeks, but there will still be opportunities to claw ahead with these differential captains. I've just gotten it wrong on both occasions. As for my bench, Ndai was the biggest disappointment. He only got 7 points, but when I saw him score against Wolves, I thought it could result in even bigger returns, and he had a goal disallowed towards the beginning of the second half. And the biggest swing this week was not buying Bruno Fernandes as a free transfer, replacing the injured Cole Palmer. Instead, I bought Chris Wood and Ismaila Sarr as part of a -4 hit. And despite Sarr's return, he is injured for an entire month. Chris Wood as my captain blanked, but if I bought Fernandes, he would have taken the armband, and it also would have resulted in Ndai starting. So that was a swing of around 20 points, and sometimes these 50-50 calls in FPL can lead to these massive gulf in FPL output. I don't think it was a terrible decision, but in hindsight, that -4 hit probably should have been enough to sway me the other way, and ultimately we live and learn from these decisions, or in my case, maybe you don't. In terms of my FPL rank though, it basically doubled after Game Week 3 from around 1.6 million, which was a pretty mediocre start to begin with, to 3.4 million. So there's plenty of work to do after the international break, and that's why I discussed multiple transfer plans in my Transfer Plans podcast last week. So only 38 points with the -4 taken into account was a very poor showing. With the prices, nothing has really changed actually from my Transfer Plans podcast last week. So Robert Sanchez is still 5 million and Pedro Porro costs 5.6, and I think Murillo could go down to 5.4 million in the next week or two, but maybe those Burnley and Sunderland fixtures will save him for a little while longer. Konsa is still 4.5 million despite a poor start to the season, and when Aston Villa kept a clean sheet in Game Week 1 against Newcastle, Konsa still essentially blanked because of his red card in that particular game. Mohamed Salah is 14.5 million, and two of the main price risers over the last couple of weeks have been Reinders and Gakpo, the two Dutchmen. So Gakpo cost 7.7 million and Reinders is 5.7, and Ismaila Sarr would have been so popular going into Game Week 4, but he's now set to miss 3 to 4 weeks due to a hamstring injury. Joao Pedro is also 7.7 million, and Chris Wood has the exact same price tag, but I think Mateta would be more appealing over the next 2 weeks arguably, but at least Chris Wood has Burnley and Sunderland over the next 3, and Ollie Watkins is 8.9. As for those on my bench, both Dubravka and Reinildo cost 4 million, Gabriel is at 6.1, and the final player is Ndai at 6.5 million, but Grealish is getting all the attention. I think in the long term though, Ndai might be the best Toffees midfielder, getting the most goals in that team. But let's now discuss my transfer plans, which are updated after some of the recent bits of news and all of that jazz. So of course, with the departure of Nuno Espirito Santo, I would be less keen on Murillo, and whilst this transfer isn't penciled in, I'm quite keen to replace him with Lacroix, who faces Sunderland this week. He has DEFCON potential, and it would also give me enough money to buy Semenyo, either this week for a -4 hit or doing it as a free transfer going into Game Week 5. So that's something I'm looking at, and that would replace the injured Ismaila Sarr. By the time we get to Game Week 6 or 7, the Senegalese forward could be back, but I think Semenyo long-term would be one of the best midfielders in FPL, and I have to be honest, I'm not particularly enticed by the options in this position right now. Apart from Salah, Palmer when he's available, I don't really see too many taking the mantle. When Bukayo Saka is back from injury, he would be another one, but they're so expensive and you can't fit all of them into the same setup. Bruno Fernandes would be another consideration for me, but I would have to change my structure quite substantially. So Semenyo would be my ideal replacement for Ismaila Sarr, and in order to do that, I need to find extra money. I've got 0.7 million in the bank, and by getting Lacroix in for Murillo, it'll give me enough money to then go from Ismaila Sarr to Antoine Semenyo, who currently costs 7.4 million. But some alternative moves include Chris Wood to Mateta, which I discussed on Saturday, and this would also give me enough money to buy Antoine Semenyo in the process, because Mateta costs 7.5 million as opposed to Chris Wood at 7.7. And this last potential transfer would have been made if I was in a position of strength where I would have the likes of Semenyo already in my team, a good start to the season, and not too many fires to put out. But with the injury to Ismail Assar, that would be a priority to replace in the midfield. So going from Konsa to Mark Gay seems like a luxury. Now, both players scored against Serbia in that 5-0 victory, and Mark Gay got an assist on top of that. And against Aston Villa, he scored a brilliant goal in what seemed to be potentially his final game for Crystal Palace, but he is going to stay with the Eagles this season after being so close to signing for Liverpool, and that would have been very appealing at 4.5 million. But he will get DEFCON, also the odd clean sheet here and there, and Crystal Palace have a very solid 11. Their problem will be their depth, but I do think Chris Richards might be slightly better for defensive contributions over the course of the season, and Lacroix and Munoz will offer an even higher ceiling, in my opinion. Lacroix will get DEFCON consistently, and Munoz will get goals and assists very regularly for a defender. But with all of that in mind, this will be my team selection for Game Week 4 with my updated transfer plans following what's happened in the last week. Robert Sanchez will still be my goalkeeper against Brentford away. There is no chance I'm starting Dubravka facing Liverpool at home. As for my defenders, I'm going for a back four with the signing of Lacroix. This could still be Daniel Munoz, but one of the main reasons why I would lean towards Lacroix is to give me the extra funds to buy Antoine Semenyo, and that would likely be in Game Week 5. Gabriel faces Nottingham Forest at home, and maybe Forest will be more appealing from an offensive perspective, but the likes of Chris Wood will be less nailed on, and he had a great relationship with Nuno Espirito Santo and scored so many goals under his leadership. Konsa is facing Everton away, and Pedro Porro is also away from home facing West Ham. So in terms of the clean sheets, I think Lacroix and Gabriel will be the most likely from my defensive line, and Pedro Porro can get some attacking potential there. He hasn't delivered a single goal or assist so far this season, but he is on set pieces, and ultimately from these defenders he offers the most attacking threat by some distance. Going into the midfield, I'm going for 4 instead of the usual 5, with Salah and Gakpo facing Burnley away, and that speaks for itself. But Salah's record against the Clarets is very questionable, with 1 goal and 2 assists across 10 matches, and Reinders is facing Manchester United at home. He was incredible for me in Game Week 1 facing Wolves, but he has been a massive letdown ever since, and maybe what we can take from the first 3 Game Weeks of the season is to target Wolves as much as you can, and that's why Ndai also scored in Game Week 3 against them, and he faces Aston Villa this time round. So one possible reasoning for buying Semenyo this week is to maybe avoid that sort of clash between Konsa and Ndai, and between those two I will lean towards Ndai. I think both teams will score in that game, as I'll show you in my Predicted Lineups podcast and also the deadline stream with my scoreline predictions. But I think Aston Villa could still bounce back and get a victory, even if they concede in the process, and Konsa won't get that many defensive contributions, and in terms of clean sheets, they do seem few and far between for Aston Villa, but they still have a solid starting 11. They made some promising signings towards the end of that transfer window, and I think things will click eventually under Unai Emery. To complete the starting 11, I've got 2 reliable forwards in Joao Pedro and Ollie Watkins, who came on as a substitute in England's 5-0 win, but he didn't score or assist. I still think he played relatively well though, and I think Watkins over time will prove his consistency and get plenty of returns for Aston Villa. He is the main talisman for them and one of the most likely goal scorers in that Everton-Aston Villa match this weekend. And Joao Pedro has been so consistent for Chelsea, only 1 blank, which came against Crystal Palace back in Game Week 1, and Delap will likely miss 2 to 3 months with a hamstring injury, and Joao Pedro will be quite nailed on in that Chelsea attack. To complete my 15-man squad though, I've got Dubravka, Chris Wood, Reinildo Mandava, and the injured Ismail Assar, who would have been a certain starter in this setup facing Sunderland at home, and potentially a captaincy option as well. Now, benching Chris Wood could backfire, I do recognise that, and he is capable of scoring in such fixtures, but even his minutes are a bit questionable this week with the long travel distances between New Zealand and the UK, and I still think it's worth keeping him for those Burnley and Sunderland games, but I'm still quite worried about him and his minutes moving forward with Ange Postecoglou taking the helm, and things will be very different compared to Nuno Espirito Santo. So that is probably one to monitor, and even Murillo isn't a certain sell, but going from him to Lacroix and giving me enough funds to buy Antoine Semenyo in the midfield seems so appealing, and it looks like the most likely course of action for my FPL team. And as for my captain, Mohamed Salah will likely take the armband facing Burnley away, and Joao Pedro will have the vice captaincy this time round. If I were to go for a Munoz or Jean-Philippe Mateta, they could also be in that conversation. And it goes without saying that Erling Haaland, who scored 5 goals for Norway in the recent match, an 11-1 victory for them, he would be one of the standout captaincy options overall, and he might be number 1 over Mohamed Salah. Let me know your thoughts down the comment section below. But the last thing to really talk about before previewing Game Week 5 and how things could look like with Semenyo and Lacroix is the expected points for the upcoming deadline. So Robert Sanchez still has the same figure at 3.6, Gabriel is at 5.2, and Lacroix is extremely high at 5.4. Konsa and Pedro Porro are below 4, so in the case of Konsa 3.3 and Porro has 3.9. Salah has gone down to 8, but that's still the highest of any player this week. Cody Gakpo has also suffered a decrease to 5.2 expected points, and ultimately he's much stronger and more consistent in home matches. But Reinders has increased ever so slightly to 4.5, and Ndiaye remains stable, producing 4.7 expected points. And Joao Pedro always has a similar figure of 5 to 5.5, and it's currently at 5.2. But Ollie Watkins is even higher than him with 5.5 expected points. And on my bench, Dubravka has 3.1. Chris Wood, who is the first substitute, ready to come on if needed, he has 4.2. Reinildo has 3, which is kind of the norm with him, and Ismaila Sarr has 0. He would have been at around 5 to 6 with the predicted points, and he would have been one of the best midfielder options for Game Week 4. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. All these stats are taken by the website Fantasy Football Hub, and you can also check out all these different websites for Fantasy Premier League like FPL.team, which I'll use in the next section to preview Game Week 5. With 0.7 million at my disposal, I still have plenty of flexibility with my transfer plans despite only having one available move. Robert Sanchez would face Man United away, the same goes for Joao Pedro in my starting 11, and I could go for a back 4 of Pedro Porro facing Brighton, also away. Lacroix and Konsa would also have away fixtures against West Ham and Sunderland respectively, and it's between Gabriel, Ndiaye and Reinders for that final starting spot. But buying Semenyo for the injured Ismaila Sarr would be a massive upgrade, of course, and I would still have 0.3 million in the bank, and it's all because Lacroix in for Murillo gives me an extra 0.5 million to have 1.2 overall. But Salah and Gakpo facing Everton at home remains decent, and I could have Chris Wood as a viable captaincy option against his former club Burnley, and also Ollie Watkins, who would also be a rival for the armband. But that is a solid starting 11 in my opinion. The only downside is a lot of away fixtures for my players that week, and the likes of Ndiaye or Reinders on my bench could produce returns despite tough fixtures against Liverpool and Arsenal. Reinildo would be last on my bench facing Aston Villa, and Dubravka faces Forest at home, but I would prioritise Robert Sanchez against Man United. The expected points is 54.5, and if you compare that to what FPL.team say for Game Week 4, it is slightly lower because for Game Week 4 it's 55 exactly, and that's with the assumption I don't buy Antoine Semenyo for a -4 hit this week, and I go for this starting 11 I discuss throughout most of this video. So make sure to use websites like FPL.team to visualize future game weeks, compare different transfer plans and chip strategies. I'll be referring to this tool throughout the season with my wildcard and free hit squads. The same goes for my team selections and the deadline streams. Stay tuned for the next one on Saturday. I'll be answering hundreds of your questions on Saturday, and the same goes throughout my deadline streams this season. The same goes for providing multiple graphics, like the top 10 captaincy options, and I have made a significant change to this list. Cole Palmer drops out because he is still red flagged against Brentford, but if reports indicate that he's well poised to start in that West London derby, he would re-enter the conversation for the premium captaincy options this week. Bruno Fernandes is currently 10th. He is on 99 goals for Manchester United. He could make it 100 in that Manchester derby. Gyökeres is 9th, facing a Nottingham Forest side with a new manager who isn't known for his defensive tactics, and Daniel Munoz has so many avenues to points facing Sunderland at home through DEFCON, but more importantly the clean sheets, goals and assists which he offers so regularly for a defender. Florian Wirtz scored for Germany over the international break against Northern Ireland. He is facing Burnley away next, and I think this could be his first Premier League goal for Liverpool. Gakpo is 6th. He got an assist for the Netherlands this week, but I think he's also the most informed Liverpool attacker alongside Ekitike. Joao Pedro is 5th, facing Brentford away, and Mateta is in the top 4, facing Sunderland at home, and Ekitike is in the podium with Erling Haaland and Salah, but I think there could be a change to that top spot, and Haaland could pip Salah as the best captaincy option this week, facing Man United. But Ruben Amorim, despite all his faults, has made United very tough to beat in these big games, and he also got good results against Man City last season, a 2-1 win at the Etihad and a 0-0 draw at Old Trafford. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or find it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content. Both FPL and UCL Fantasy are able to get this to over 200 likes on YouTube and to keep on pushing towards new goals like 36,000 subscribers. Follow me on X, Instagram and Blue Sky, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the Championships, further links to my videos, amongst many other perks. My Discord server, the FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you on Saturday for the next FPL deadline stream, and keep your eyes peeled for next Tuesday as the first UCL Fantasy deadline stream takes place.